Hello and welcome to the Sallen Coefficient, in which I review board games, especially relating them to how strategically deep they are, how long they take, and whether or not there's too much rules overhead and randomness to really affect that strategic depth. So I'm going to give this a numerical value on the Sallen Coefficient rating scale that's supposed to kind of give you an idea of whether or not a game is worth the amount of effort you're going to put into it. So in addition to that, I'll give you my own personal opinion of the game, which is not always the same, though it is a very important this coefficient is kind of an important factor, of course, whenever I make my decisions, but everybody has their own reason for rating in certain ways. So I'm going to go into that a little bit at the end. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about Terra Mystica. Terra Mystica is one of the most popular games right now on the Board Game Geek website. It rose up to, I think at one point it was like number 3, maybe even number 2 in the Board Game Geek top 500 games of all time. And I'm going to tell you about what type of strategic choices and depth decisions you're going to be making in a game of Terra Mystica, and I'll go into whether or not I feel that it is worth the amount of time you're going to be committing to it. So I'm not going to offer you a detailed walkthrough. However, I do have a link to a walkthrough. At least I tried to set that up. I had a little bit of problems getting this video started, but I tried to link to Rahdo's walkthrough of Terra Mystica because I think he does a really excellent job with showing you how to play the game. So I'm going to mainly talk about my criticism of the game, and we'll go ahead and get started off with the strategic depth in the game, which is basically what are you rewarded for? In other words, your scoring. In a game of Terra Mystica, you're going to be rewarded points, and you're going to be tracking those on the outside of the board. So you have a certain amount of points that you're going to be getting throughout the game, and you might be spending those points to try to get more resources. And then at the end of the game, there's going to be different bonuses awarded. So that kind of changes with the expansion. But anyway, so you have a certain amount of end game scoring that you are guaranteed, is going to go to the players, and it gets rewarded. It's a fixed amount. It's like 18 points to whoever gets first place in this specific category. You're also going to have round bonuses that are all laid out as you play the game. So you're going to shuffle up these round tiles. You're going to put them all out, and then you'll end up figuring out what in what round is these different things going to be rewarded. So, for example, it might be that in the first round you get extra points for building dwellings. It might be you get points for other actions in other rounds. So they look kind of like this, and you get a certain amount of points for taking that specific action. In this case, it's actually terraforming. So the way that this scoring really works is that it makes players look at the different rounds they're going to be rewarded for actions in and try to find a way to best dovetail actions from prior rounds so that they're getting rewarded for what they do in earlier rounds, and then can continually keep on accruing more points for actions that they might have set up themselves for in other rounds. There's also a certain amount of points you can take every time you build a city, and you're going to take points as well as a specific income. So the more points you get, usually the worse the income, specific type of income is. And so you've got two different main sources of points. You have this sort of fixed scoring, which is going to happen at the end of the game, and then you have these types of round scoring, which then introduces more points into the total possible point economy in the game. There are a few specific races in Terra Mystica, and I might talk about the different races in the game. Every time you play as a different fantasy race. But different races, specific ones will have maybe a reward for doing an action, and it almost functions like a permanent round bonus for that race. They just get that in every single round. In addition to that, every round, the players are going to be drafting bonus tiles that then give them more points for what happens in that round. So the way that they draft is that you might be sitting there hoping that a certain player passes before you because they have a scoring tile that you really want for your next round. So you can be sitting there trying to kind of elongate your rounds, taking actions just so that you can wait for that player and pass after that player goes. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can get points, but a lot of times newer players really focus on the end game scoring. They see that sort of like at the end of the road. But there's a lot of ways you should be scoring points throughout the game. So there's a lot of things you can do. You can actually get favor tiles that can give you more points. Anyway, it's really finding ways that you can make actions where the ultimate goal is getting an end game scoring, but you're getting rewarded by taking those actions. What's really nice about these scoring tiles is that every one of these for the round is known at the beginning of the game. So you're able to make a lot of strategic, deep choices based on what you do in an earlier turn and where it's going to leave you to be able to get points for what's going to come in later turns. So that's one of my favorite things about the game, is that you're able to see the entire, there's no randomness that's revealed throughout the game. All of the randomness in the game comes from players' actions. There is nothing that's like flipped. There's nothing that's hidden. It's all right there. It's just the tension comes from other players and their interactions. But before I talk about that, let me talk to you guys about the economy. In Terra Mystica, every player is going to be a fantasy race, and you will get your own little player board. And a player board might look something like, oh, say, this one right here. And your economy at the beginning of the round will be based on what buildings you have built on the board. Every time you build a building, it frees up a spot that then tells you, okay, I get a cube. Cubes are called workers in this game. Anyway, what you need to do when you're playing Terra Mystica is decide what you're going to do with your workers and how you're going to make sure that you keep an influx of workers if you feel like workers are what you need to be able to enact the best strategy to get the most points at the best times. It's a lot about timing, but you have to have the right resources, and those resources are going to depend on what buildings you have built and then upgraded in prior rounds. It's great to expand your entire area, but it costs you money. It costs you resources. And then you're only going to be rewarded one worker for every one of those, every expansion that you make. So in a lot of ways, you have to be very deliberate in terms of what you actually build, because you're going to need certain types of resources in later rounds. So it might be that I don't get rewarded for building a building in an earlier round, but I built that because I knew I would need that sort of income, and I need to accrue that so that in later round I could take advantage of a scoring tile that I'm anticipating coming up. So there's an awful lot of economic decision, because what you build doesn't just cost a certain amount of resources that you need, it also impacts what you're going to be getting in future rounds. So you've got, and there's three types of resources in the game. There is priests, there is workers, and there is gold. And you might see right there, you got priest, worker, gold. You can see that a priest can become a worker, can become a gold. So they're like, one is the most powerful, then you've got workers, then you've got the gold. Generally, you always need gold in like quantities. So you're gonna need like 5 or 6 gold, and you only ever get large quantities of gold when gold is the only thing that you're getting. You'll almost never get more than one priest for taking an action, but you sometimes have specific requirements where you need a priest to do something, or you need a priest to upgrade something, or you need a priest to take a religious action on the cult tracks. And anyway, the way that your economy can really kind of morph into different things, and the actions that you take are going to impact what you have, is another big draw of the game here. Your decisions in earlier rounds are going to impact what you have at your disposal in later rounds. Though it's never set in stone, the ability to convert workers means that you're going to be having to make decisions. Like, there's one time when I had to turn 3 workers into 3 gold, and that's a tough call. It's really difficult because it's already hard enough to get workers. I just had too many of my cheaper buildings built, getting me tons of cubes, and I didn't have many of these trading posts out that were getting me the money that I needed. So that's one thing to consider. The economy is going to be very fluid in Terra Mystica. Every action you take is going to, if you upgrade a building, you're now no longer getting that worker. Instead, you're going to be getting $2 and a gold in a magic movement. If you upgrade it to a religious building, now you're just getting a priest. No longer do you get any money for that, and so on. So it's just all sorts of different decisions. They're all going to impact you. Impact, not only do they have a cost now, but they also have an impact on your future income. So you got to take those things into consideration. Terra Mystica is at its heart a Euro game. That means the interaction in Terra Mystica is going to be very indirect. But I find that the different push and pull that interaction in Terra Mystica forces you to consider is just a huge part of the game. So the first way, pretty obvious, of interaction, the first method is on the board in Terra Mystica. So you have a board right here, and you can see all these pretty different little hexes, and they all are different colors because different races need that color to and be able to inhabit. So if you're a red, one of the races that's red pieces in this game, you have to go on the red pieces to start the game. However, you have the ability to change the land to whatever color it is that you are. And the thing is, you are going to be fighting with other players on this board. Now, imagine if this board had been all just a bunch of hexes that had no color, that had no properties to them. You would just be like trying to essentially close in other players as quickly as you could. In Terra Mystica, because every race has a different sort of relationship to that specific terrain, meaning if you're here with the red, depending on how far away, so we can see here that red is really easy to be terraformed into either gray or yellow. But to terraform red into the blue or the black terrain costs you 3 shovels. And 3 shovels is like more than you're going to get at any point in the game, unless you are specifically getting a bunch of workers to get lots of shovels. So I mean, like, it basically, what the board having these prior printed properties does is it allows you to look at what different other players are playing as in the game. There is 2 sides to the board. This is the older version. This is kind of the newer map with the expansion. Anyway, the choices that you are making is going to be dependent on what you see as a threat from other players that are around you. Because in Terra Mystica, usually every race wants to expand. There are very few races that just want to not do anything and not go anywhere and just upgrade. You're almost always going to be jockeying for board position and having the largest connected network, which is one of the things you're going to be scoring at endgame points for. However, you're always looking at what other races are around you and how hard it's going to be for them to terraform. And then that kind of lets you prioritize. What do I need to do when? Where am I going to be headed to? How am I going to eventually connect up all my buildings for the shipping network, which is always a scoring feature in Terra Mystica. That's always the case. One thing I find really cool is in the expansion. I'm going to talk about expansion actually later. I'll talk about that at the end. Sorry, spoiler alert. I will talk about the extra things that are added in the expansion. One of them is endgame scoring things. Anyway, the board and your interactions on the actual board itself are just absolutely very tense, cause you to consistently reanalyze what your choices that you've made are and where what is your threat, where is it coming at you from, and how are you going to avoid any sort of you getting closed in, boxed in by other players. So you're making an awful lot of choices that way. Other ways for interaction is, I guess I should continue talking about the board because I didn't mention one thing, and that is when you're here on the board, you might think, well, I'll just go off here in the corner where nobody's going to bother me, and that would be great, and I can be happy on my own. And the thing is, in Terra Mystica, resources are so tight, and you are given a bonus for being next to other players, and that bonus is you are not going to be able to upgrade many buildings if you don't have that bonus, that you're kind of forced into this sort of happy, I don't know, a little bit of an equilibrium at the start of the game because you're going to be benefiting other players by being next to them. But then as the game goes on, you'll find like the rivalries will really come out when somebody takes that tile that you needed to be able to bridge up your network, when they cut you off from being able to make it to the river that you needed to be next to so that you could then connect your network at the end of the game. You're forced to be next to each other because you're given those bonuses for your trading posts, but man, it is really intense when you're next to each other and both staring at that, that green race, that green race and the red race, both staring at that spot right there, and who's going to get it. It is incredibly tense, and I really like the way that you're rewarded for being next to each other, but obviously the competition is that double-edged sword that you got to work with. So the shared board, really huge part of it. Another thing is that the magic system in the game of Terra Mystica. Now, what makes magic magical is that it really can become virtually anything in the resources of the game. Magic is managed on a player's unique board, and you have magic that's going to be fired up every time that somebody around you builds. You have the choice to be able to take magic points, and you're going to be slowly charging it up to this bowl, and then eventually once it's in this bowl, once you finally got stuff here, you can start using it. And like I said, it's magical. You can spend 5 magic to get a priest. You can spend 1 magic to get a coin. So it's really like this sort of flexible resource in the game. However, you are going to need to sometimes fight for really efficient uses of magic. Like normally it's a 1-for-1, 1 gold gets you 1 magic, gets you 1 gold. Well, if you can take this conversion right here, which can only be taken by 1 player per turn, then you can get 3 extra free gold. And that's huge. That's really, really huge. The spots on the board that are conversions that can only be done once per round will be fought over tooth and nail. And this is another big type of resource of interaction, of competition for players. So you're going to want to take this more times than is possible in every round. So very, very tight board. These actions will be very highly sought after. And that's one way that Terra Mystica uses magic to make the interactions between players like a lot more tense and really interesting. So I especially like the way that you are rewarded for being next to other players, but then at the same time, you're going to be competing because of that magic as well. So the magic system is incredibly interesting. It's almost like ill-gotten gains. Like you're next to somebody, so you're getting rewarded for it, but at the same time, it's sometimes you'll be paying points to take that magic. So it's a really interesting system because of that. So next up here, and I normally wouldn't even talk about this in my review, but there is so much diversity in the game of Terra Mystica, meaning that without the expansion, you've got 14 different potential fantasy races to play as. 14 of them, and each of them functions vastly different than one another. The reason that I'm talking about this is that what races are present in every game of Terra Mystica is going to vastly change what actions are going to be more fought after. More sought after, I should say, fought over. And anyway, so if you play as the Chaos Magicians here, they start with only 1 place on the board. It's really, really tough to be the Chaos Magicians. You do get to place absolutely last, so you get to make your choices based on everybody else, but you end up with a very tight, small network because you start in only 1 spot. However, you get all kinds of bonuses from the cult track. So if I see the Chaos Magicians in a game, I'm going to know that their board presence is going to be lower, and as a result, I'm going to think, well, if there's other races that really want to advance on these cult tracks, then they're going to have some competition from the Chaos Magicians. These cult tracks are just kind of linear races to the top. Whoever's at the top is going to get more points than whoever's in second and third. And to be able to cross over to the top, you have to have built a city. It's just kind of a prerequisite. But you're also going to be fighting over whoever gets to send priests to this track first gets more efficient conversions of points. So they get 3 points for the first priest and so on. So anyway, this is a way that you score points. This is one of the end game things for points, but it's going to depend how good it is worth going after. This is going to depend on how many races you're going to be most likely competing for. So depending on what end game scoring is there, what races are there are going to make some end game scoring better than others. And I would say that that's not the only case. Like the faction diversity and how you anticipate what other players are going to do, the fact that they've each got a different race kind of gives you a little bit of a window into maybe the possibilities that they would take. But I still see quite a bit of individual chance and individual probability when each player is in control of their own fantasy race. One thing I would like to mention that's kind of cool about the cult track is that whenever you build a religious building, you're able to actually choose a favor tile, and these favor tiles could involve bonuses on these cult tracks. That's another way besides priests. So it's not only just like this linear, how many priests go here, how high do they get? It's also based on religious buildings that are built. So it is kind of like a separate thing, though. You could play the entire game and never even build a single religious building, not do anything, and still win the game as long as other players are fighting too much and wasting a lot of resources fighting for those end game scoring here on this cult track. So the reason I mentioned faction diversity is just because it is such a huge part of the decisions that you make. Like your strategy should be based on what you see, the doors that you see open up as a result of what races you see present. The other thing that I would like to mention here is the expansion. So Terra Mystica has an expansion. I've got the box right over here. It's called Fire and Ice. It's the one that I was using to introduce. It involves a few what I would call fixes to the game. So if you're just going to play with the base game Terra Mystica, I would incorporate a few of these fixes into your game, even if you don't own Terra Mystica Fire and Ice. And one of them is that you auction off every race. So you know which races are going to be playing in each game of Terra Mystica. And then you go through and say, well, in this game, we're going to play with the Swarmlings, we're going to play with the Witches, and so on until you've got one for every player. And then you go through and bid points, because not every race is created equal. They might be good on their own in a vacuum, pretty much all of them, but even that's a little bit, some races just kind of struggle more than others in general. But depending on what other races are available, you'll be able to kind of gauge, and you'll also know all the scoring tiles at the beginning, but you kind of need to be able to auction if you're playing at that next level with experienced players. So that's something that I like from the expansion. Obviously, the first time you're playing with new players, don't even worry about that. You need like 5 learning games of Terra Mystica before you even know how the economy is going to impact the rest of your game. The other thing that the expansion adds is a variable turn order track, whereby whenever you pass, you're going to move your token over. And so like whoever passes first is first, whoever passes second is second, and so on. And it really helps in the base game. There's just a first player marker that's got by the first person who passes. And a lot of times the second person in turn order ends up being really randomly getting a lot of bonuses, and by doing nothing themselves. So this is, I think, something that just rounds out the game quite a bit better, and I really like that. It also comes with some unique races, which are, like they're not going to add strategic depth to your to one individual game, but they give you that, more things to consider, because they really do work differently. Like you get one of those races is incredibly interactive, and it's able to make volcanoes happen on the board. And most of the time when a player terraforms, it can still be terraformed, but those volcanoes are just permanently gone. So it can be really, really mean. You can just cut somebody off from the very start, and they can't do anything about it. Anyway, though, why do I have? Oh, the reason I was showing you this is because one of the races goes up and down on these cult tracks to terraform. They spend 3 points on a cult track to terraform, and that just is, blows my mind. One of the races uses their magic, like burns it, totally loses it from the game, to be able to terraform. And it is just really, really interesting, the mechanisms that are on display there that are being explored in the expansion races. Another thing that's really cool about the expansion is that it adds an additional scoring that you're supposed to shuffle and choose one of. I believe there's like 3 or 4 of them, and they'll cause you to build in a different way than even usually in a game of Terra Mystica. You're going to be building 2 unique settlements until they each become cities, and then eventually at the end of the game connecting them so that you can get the largest network. These make you also try to do things like build along the outside of the board as much as possible, or build the most individual unique settlements that are at least like that are not directly adjacent to each other. One of them is like the largest distance between your between 2 of your buildings. And so you can have some really interesting other things to consider when you're playing this game, because to me, like, it just is yet another decision to have to make into the equation. And it makes me think kind of almost like the end game scoring in Kingdom Builder, where like, it really pushes my brain in a new direction, though it's a lot more strategic here. You get a lot more going on. It's a much longer game. Specifically talking about player count, Terra Mystica can play with 2 through 5, I think it says on the box, but you never want to play this game with 2. It just is, the board does not change at all. I would say the same thing about 3 players. It does not work well with 3 because the board is still way too big. Even with 4 players, the game feels very loosey-goosey. With 5 players, though, I think is really where this game is best. And it takes about 2.5 hours to play at 5 players. You can get quite a bit lower, and I have in my group because we've played it. I would just say, though, that the amount of decisions and the fact that you don't have any randomness coming from the game system itself, the only randomness is the unpredictability of other players, that it sustains that 2.5 hours, and it feels to me like way short. It feels like the game just, I've never been sitting there like, when's this game going to get over? I've been sitting there thinking like, when's this player going to finish their turn? So I think it can be prone to a little bit of analysis paralysis because of just how much you have to consider your decision. Not only, how many points you get right now, but how many points you can get later based on what economy and what board position you're at, and whether or not you're fighting for end game goals that are attainable for you, who you're fighting against, and how you're going to be sort of doing your best to interact and throw a wrench into their plans. For that reason, I specifically consider that Terra Mystica just has so much to crunch on as you're playing the game, and I really, really like it for that. The Sallen coefficient for Terra Mystica is a 9 out of 10. It is one of those games where I still don't know if a 10 exists on this scale, so you can consider the 9 like me giving it pretty much my highest possible rating. Even though it is a longer game, it is an extended game, you are going to be rewarded for the time that you put into Terra Mystica. It's because the amount of depth in this game is just, it's tough to contain that in any shorter experience. And the fact that you're going to be consistently interacted with by other players, that the game systems encourage the type of interaction that breeds just tension throughout the game, makes it that 9, makes it that highest score. In my own personal opinion of Terra Mystica, it's a 10. It's in my opinion, I see very few other games that give me the same level of depth and strategic choice, and it's because I'm just always so excited to play a game of Terra Mystica when I've got so many different races I can be, and the way that they all kind of want the same thing, but the way they go about getting them is quite different, and the way that they're going to go about interacting with other players is quite different. It's just something I'm always ready to play, and that's the Sallen coefficient here on Terra Mystica. So really quick, thanks to my sponsor, Game Surplus. Game Surplus, bringing the world of board games to you. Find them at www.gamesurplus.com. Awesome stuff there. Carmen's got excellent customer service, and that's really the reason to go there. You get the type of customer service you hope from a friendly local game store, but you've got the ability to use them from wherever because they are online. So really great guy supporting some really awesome content online. And anyway, I hope you go and check them out. This has been the Sallen Coefficient on Terra Mystica. I'm Joe Sallen. I hope you have a wonderful week of gaming, and catch me on the next episode of the Sallen Coefficient.